Howdy, guys. Well, it's Friday. Let's dig into a question. Just as a reminder, questions at lighthousebaptist.net is where to send in a question. We answer them here every Friday. And so please send a question to questions at lighthousebaptist.net. And I'll do my very best to have a good conversation with you about it. This is a question that we're tackling today that, I don't think about very much, but I know is really important to some people. And it is this. To a Christian, does it matter if we are cremated or buried? Man, talk about a practical question. I think one of the reasons I want to answer this question is if you have concerns about this, man, that is a time of a lot of stress where a loved one has died and you're making those final arrangements and trying to honor their wishes. And also, I've sat with so many families around that season of the family cycle where somebody has passed away and they don't want to get things wrong. They want to honor God and they want to honor the person who's passed. And there is a lot of stress and maybe even fear over, oh my gosh, we want to get this right. And I'm not sure where the idea came from that a Christian should not be cremated. Let me give you my short answer right now. I don't think it matters one bit. Cremation just does to the human body. Others have said this does to the human body in 40 minutes what it takes nature 40 years to do. But I don't think there's one bit of difference in the eyes of God. So whatever, if you're in a season like that, or when you get to a season like that, man, deal with the grief, deal with honoring God, but you're not going to make a mistake in this area. I would say that it doesn't matter at all. But let's spend some minute talking about it. Where does this idea come from? Well, some people think that idea of cremation or it being a negative or a positive thing might come from the burial of Saul in First Chronicles, and this is also dealt with in the writings of Samuel. But in First Chronicles, after Saul is just brutalized by the Philistines, like he's decapitated and bad things happen to Saul, and we see this as a Philistine victory. We also see it as, look, Saul just turned away from God and was living life on his own and was outside of God's protection. And this is what happens. But it says, when the people of Jabesh Gilead heard about everything the Philistines had done to Saul, all their men of valor set out and retrieved the bodies of Saul and his sons and brought them to Jabesh, and they buried their bones under the oka in Jabesh and fasted 7 days. Now you get that far, and that part is in Samuel 2, and it really looks like they're doing all they can to honor Saul. And some people take this and say, look, Saul's body was in no condition to lie in state. His body had been completely messed up by the Philistines. The most honorable thing they could do was to burn his body. But then in First Chronicles, where I'm reading from, it continues and says, so Saul died for his unfaithfulness to the Lord, because he did not keep the word of the Lord and even consulted a medium for guidance. And he failed to inquire of the Lord. So the Lord put him to death and turned the kingdom over to David, the son of Jesse. So some people read this and say, no, this was not an honorable death. Rather, this was God's final judgment on Saul. And he was cremated. He was burned as a way to give dishonor to his body. Man, take your pick on that. I don't know that I have a strong opinion on that. But either way, we can say this had more to do with honoring or dishonoring him here in this life. It had nothing to do with the afterlife. What would happen next for Saul certainly is not taken into consideration at all in these passages. Let's turn to 1 Thessalonians and think about how we should grieve in times when there's a death in the family, when there's a death in a church family. It's a horrible time. There's a ton of grief. While the Bible doesn't tell us the way we must handle the deceased body, the Bible does give us the proper way to grieve. And it says this in 1 Thessalonians, brothers, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death. Don't you love that the Bible honors, that Paul honors the question, hey, what about those that we love that have died? Can we trust that they're with God? Can we trust that bad things aren't happening to them? Can we trust that life, the way they live their life here, mattered? So Paul says, brothers, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death. Why would Paul use the word sleep? Is he just trying to avoid the difficult word that have died? No, I don't think so. I think Paul's trying to make a point that you say, when somebody's asleep, they're not conscious, you can't talk to them, but you don't assume they're not there anymore. Now, certainly there's signs of life, they're breathing and whatever, but you don't think they're gone. And Paul says, look, when those who have been faithful to God, when people are Christians have died, then they're still alive. Someday, I remember Billy Graham saying, someday you'll hear that Billy Graham died. Don't believe it for a minute. I'm still alive and well and with the Father in heaven. What a great way to say that. Look, Jesus came to take death upon himself so that we might not perish if we were to believe in him. So Paul is thinking about his friends witnessing death and going, you can think about it more like sleep than you think about it like termination, because these people that you love are still alive and well. So he continues and says, so that you will not grieve like the rest who are without hope. Man, we are supposed to grieve, but we're supposed to grieve with hope. To be in Christ is to not fear about the future. Not only the future on earth, in fact, I would say there's much more to fear about our future on earth than there is our future in eternity. The reason we have no fear about what happens to us in the here and now is because we're confident that whatever happens to us in the here and now, we are secure, seated in Christ in the heavenly places forever. Paul continues, for since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, we also believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. So Paul says, look, and this is over and over in the New Testament, Jesus' resurrection was not only so we could see Jesus conquer death for him, rather it was the guarantee of our resurrection. How can we know that there is life after the grave? Well, because we've seen Jesus rise from the dead. And that's where our hope comes from, that we too will rise from the dead. By the word of the Lord, Paul continues, we declare to you that we who are alive and remain till the coming of the Lord will by no means precede those who have fallen asleep. So your loved ones who have passed away, you're not getting to heaven before them. We will in no way precede. So some would even say there's a soul sleep where when we die, our souls are just nothing. And at the second coming, God will wake them up. And Paul would say, no, you're not getting there first. Christ is bringing with him those who have fallen asleep, those who have had an earthly death. And this should really encourage us. And this should already start to think, man, so what you do with a body is just not what makes the difference in the afterlife, in our time with God in heaven. So let's continue thinking, how important is the state of our physical body for our resurrection body? Does it matter what our physical body looks like at the end of our life? How does that relate to our resurrection body? Well, a couple of things we could just think about. We could think about Jesus telling the thief on the cross, today you'll be with me in paradise. Certainly the thief on the cross had been beaten and he was dying a terrible death on a cross. Certainly his body was in no shape to enter paradise. And yet Jesus looks at him and says, hey, today you'll be with me in paradise. I think we have every expectation that he wouldn't be with Jesus in paradise in some limited, frail, just got crucified kind of state, but rather he would be fit for paradise. In 2 Corinthians 5, Paul says, hey, we'd rather be absent from the body and at home with the Lord. So you think about Paul's body, had to be scarred up, many beatings, had to be frail as he aged and continued to be beaten for his faith and snake bit and shipwrecked. You know that Paul was not anticipating entering into the afterlife with his body in the same condition that it was as he sat writing to the people of Corinth. But rather he said, no, that we'd rather be, and don't you love the image? We'd rather be at home with the Lord. Do you ever not feel at home in this earth? I tell you why. Because you're not. Home is with the Lord. And that feeling of walking into your childhood home with cookies baking and Christmas music on, whatever that most comfortable scene is. I think those are glimpses of what the afterlife will be like for us, what heaven will be like. So it seems clear that our souls are not impacted by our physical state. So what do we make of our physical state after this one? Well, Paul again is really helpful in 1 Corinthians 15. He says this. So he talks about our resurrection body, but some will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body do they come? This is why, as we talk about cremation, we'd say, look, we would all confess that a body begins to decay as soon as the human dies, and there's definitely a state that you would not want that corpse to just be given life. We're not talking about zombies here. And so Paul says, look, some people might ask, like, we've seen dead bodies, it doesn't go well. Is that what we're going to be like in the resurrection? Paul says, you foolish person, what you sow does not come to life unless it dies, and what you sow is not the body. Watch this. What you sow is not the body that is to be, but a bare kernel, perhaps of wheat or some other grain. Look at verse 38. But God gives it a body as he has chosen, and to each kind of seed its own body. Like God has chosen a body for you that is your resurrection body. And Paul says it might have something to do with this body. Like, maybe I'm the best version of what I should be in this life, without bad knees and, without struggling with weight or whatever. I don't know. But Paul says, look, you can trust that God has chosen a body for you, and the body you look at now, in the same way that you could never anticipate a sunflower by looking at a sunflower seed, you could never anticipate a redwood by looking at a redwood seed. In the same way, we can't think about that we can anticipate what that resurrection body will look like. We get glimpses, maybe at Jesus' transfiguration, maybe as we see Jesus, walking through walls with his resurrection body. But even that, Paul says, look, you just are going to have to trust that God has a body chosen for you. And this body is no, does not give you a great picture of what your resurrection body will look like. It continues, there are heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, but the glory of the heavenly body is one and the glory of the earthly body is another. Look at verse 42. So it is with the resurrection of the dead. What is sown perishable, what is raised is imperishable. So although we don't know exactly what our resurrection bodies look like, Paul says there are things we can know. First of all, it's imperishable. You won't die. It's sown with dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. So Paul says, here's what you can know about yourself now. Mortal, perishable, weak, natural, dishonor. That describes your body, doesn't it? And yet Paul says someday, you know what you have to look forward to? Honor, imperishable, power, spiritual. This is the physical body that you can anticipate in your resurrection. So, all that to say, does it matter to a Christian if we are cremated, buried, entombed? No, not a bit. What we care about in that season of a family's life is grieving together, hugging on each other, loving each other, honoring the person in an appropriate way. But we certainly don't have to feel any burden of our decisions impacting eternity for that person. And as for me, cremation's fine with me. So, as with all things, take a deep breath, be loved, follow Christ, and look forward to your resurrection body. Have a good day.